Hello and welcome to Rajniti. I'm Siddharth Zarabi, and today on this episode we discuss what is happening in the Emerald Island, a neighbor with great historic, religious and cultural relationships with the Indian mainland, and this is the island nation of Sri Lanka. And with me today, Prabhash K. Datta, Senior Assistant Editor at India Today, who's also written about what is really happening to Sri Lanka's economy. Prabhash, welcome to the show, to Business Today. For a change, we are going beyond our markets and companies and talking about Sri Lanka, a nation that normally doesn't occupy so much attention in India, and presently we are, all of us are focused on what is happening in distant Ukraine, because there were thousands of Indian students who have all thankfully come back to India, and other developments in the globe. But Sri Lanka is pretty much next door. 2 years of COVID and the entire country seems to be on the brink. What is going on in Sri Lanka?
I think it's not a new problem. We just missed it because a tiny nation in a map, we just it looks like a bubble, and we don't seem to be caring much about it. While Russia and Ukraine, it's crime, it's war, it's violence, and that gets more eyeballs. So somehow we missed it, but Sri Lanka's problem and its economy going downhill, it was bound to happen. The way the country is being run for past few years, so it was bound to happen. Whatever little understanding I have of Sri Lanka, that its economy was not being managed in a way that is the need of globalized, closely intricated economies of the world. Any country, even Sri Lanka is an island, but it cannot remain an island.
Correct. It cannot remain an island, and viewers, if you have not been paying attention, some of the numbers, foreign currency reserves, which determines any economy's ability to purchase goods and undertake crucial imports, is determined by the level of foreign exchange any economy has. And that in the last 2 years and few months actually has gone down almost by 70-75%. The foreign exchange reserves are far lower than the debt that Sri Lanka has to return, which is around $4 billion, and the reserves that they have are perhaps lesser than 50% when it comes to even their debt, and that translates into an ability to just import goods for 4 weeks perhaps, and that is a very, very critical situation. Food and fuel shortages are dominating the headlines, and this was an economy which was dependent on tourism. So, Prabhash, would it be correct to say that 2 years of virtually zero international tourism on account of COVID, followed by what has happened in Ukraine, because Russian and Ukrainian tourists would spend a lot of time in Sri Lanka, is that contributing to a significant part of the problem?
We should take it a little back. Most of us remember that Easter bombing in Sri Lanka. That was the beginning of the decline of tourism sector in Sri Lanka. It could not recover. By the time Sri Lankan government could take measures to make tourists feel safe in the country, COVID struck. Not only Sri Lanka but the entire globe.
All over the world.
And tourists, people stopped going out, people stopped flying to another country. So Sri Lanka's economy, which is dependent on tourism sector, but to the extent of that 12 to 18% of its wealth comes from tourism. So if tourists stopped coming to the country, so it was not getting foreign exchange reserves. And the policies of the previous governments issuing sovereign bonds instead of opening up its economy, going for manufactured based exports or export of services. That's how we earn, or any country
In
earns.
fact, Sri Lanka was if I recall correctly, at one point of time used to be a pretty decent country when it came to textiles, for example,
Yes.
and even for gems. Sri Lankan sapphires and emeralds are world renowned for their quality. And the Easter bombing that Prabhash is referring to is the Easter bombing of 2017, which was one of the worst terrorist atrocities in Sri Lanka. And that not only did it rupture the social fabric, and remember, Sri Lanka as a country has had to grapple with terrorism and a violent internal insurgency. Even before that, that was the days of the LTTE, and this was a Easter bombing which was blamed on a Muslim radical Islamist group. And like Prabhash tells us, things have only gotten worse after COVID. There's a third and final point that I want to discuss with you today, viewers, and this is the Chinese hand. Now, COVID is, of course, known to have originated from China, but when it comes to Sri Lanka, not just Sri Lanka, in fact, and perhaps that is a separate debate where we can talk about certain countries that surround India and how there is undue and perhaps excessive interference by China for reasons that are not purely economic. They are reasons which are perhaps aimed at containing India, ring fencing India. So China creates trouble for us in the Himalayas on what is actually the Indo-Tibet border and it also creates problems or attempts to create problems for us in the ocean, and that is the Chinese hand, Prabhash. How much is China responsible for the current economic situation? Like you said at the start of our discussion, mismanagement and poor administration apart, what is the Chinese factor?
China has roughly pledged $5 billion in Sri Lanka. But where Chinese money is going? It's going into construction of highways, construction of airports, construction of ports, construction of coal power units. So it takes time, 10 years, 15 years of time to develop that infrastructure. But during that time, there is no return practically. But the Sri Lanka has to serve those debts. How will Sri Lanka serve the debt if it can't earn money? Plus, when Gotabaya Rajapaksa won 2019 election, he announced massive tax cuts. So while Sri Lanka was required to repay debts, service debts, pay interest,
Government revenue fell.
government's revenue fell.
Huh.
So, and China made sure that its money is invested for only long-term plans. So that is why just now it has happened that India has replaced Chinese offer just north of Jaffna. That hybrid power projects, India is now paying for that. So it happened when in 2021 January February they announced it. So China was agreeing to pay loans. So India gave a counter offer that instead of paying loan, will give it as a grant. So India is now replacing China's power project in Sri Lanka in the form of grants.
So this is a very important point, and to break it down for our viewers, you must have heard this news that India is extending a line of credit. Earlier this year, we had extended a 400 million currency swap and a 500 million credit line for fuel purchase, almost $1 billion. So what are you telling us, Prabhash, that is India now stepping in, and will we be in a position to reduce Chinese interference? Because Chinese interference not just in the Sri Lankan economy, it is at some point a security long-term strategic threat to India's long-term security and our access to the Asian, our trade routes. So are we going to succeed?
It looks like it's a very international diplomacy and geostrategic matters are very fluid. So this particular project is just 50-60 km off India's Tamil Nadu coast. So India is practically replacing China. But this Chinese story began with Hambantota. From this is the place which is the home of Rajapaksa family.
Yes, which is the dominant sort of clan which has ruled
since 2005.
Yes.
So Chinese came to Hambantota when Mahinda Paksa was the president, and now since then India has been trying to counter China and Sri Lanka. So this is the round where India has emerged victorious, and it is very much possible that India may be able to hold its might in Sri Lanka or India-Sri Lanka regions or waters.
We'll certainly hope that India not only comes to the aid of Sri Lanka, they are what we would call historically deeply connected to India on a civilizational basis, and for any Indian, the economic fate of Sri Lanka has great strategic and security significance for India, especially because of the Chinese factor, because of the fact that this island nation has unfortunately suffered decades of terrorism. They managed to come out of it at great human cost and economic cost, and when things seemed to be looking up, there was the Easter bombing, and then followed by COVID. India has already stepped in, and like Prabhash is saying, perhaps it is an opportunity for India to move faster and try and ensure that Sri Lanka is able to come out of its economic troubles. And like Prabhash said, and I have also seen in international diplomacy, the difference between India's assistance and China's assistance is that many times our assistance does not come with any major strings attached. And for us, countries like Nepal, Sri Lanka, Burma, even Afghanistan, where we have had significant investments in the last 20 years, are very significant for a long-term security reason. We'll leave this subject at this point. I'm going to thank Prabhash for his time with us today, and we'll come back with more on Rajniti. Till then, please do not forget to subscribe to our channel, tune in, like, share, and tell us if you feel we should address more similar subjects. Till then, goodbye.